Throughout the years, I made several videos talking about the importance of gain staging. And this is a topic that can be very confusing for a lot, and I'm still getting questions around gain staging. So what I decided to do is to combine most of my videos where I talk about gain staging all in one single video as a full, in-depth masterclass talking only about gain staging, and this is what you're watching right now. And I even added one little part that I never covered on my other videos, which is included in this masterclass. So enjoy the ride, and as you're watching this video, feel free to leave me any questions you might have. Gain staging is like the right way to start a mix, okay? So it's just a way to balance the level of a recording before you start mixing a session. Now, to make a long story short, we gain stage a session to give us headroom while mixing. So there are several reasons why I do love to gain stage a session before starting a mix. Headroom is one of them. So if we go here in Cubase, when I'm talking about headroom, for example, let's look at the stereo bus that I have right here. Now, at the moment, the stereo bus is at a -5, -4 dBFS level, which is perfect. And the reason why is because my session has been gain staged properly. So that gives me some headroom on my mix bus. I also gain stage to avoid peaking my channels and to keep my faders near unity point, which is the 0 point on a channel. And the reason why I like to leave everything at unity point is a matter of resolution. For example, if I bring down the level of the channel by 10 dB, the distance between those two dB points is going to be larger, opposed to if I have my fader down the channel, where the distance between the same dB points is going to be way tighter. Okay, so the resolution is way better when my faders are near unity point. This is a personal preference. I love to work this way, way better for automation, in my opinion. And I just avoid getting all of my channels super low in the mixing session. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to end up with a few channels that are going to be low. I don't mind that if that happens, but for the most part, for the most of the channels, I like to have them close to unity point. And same for my mix bus. My mix bus, I love it to stay at 0, and I usually don't touch it. And same for instrument buses, I'm going to leave them at unity point unless I need to automate them for some reason. Then I don't have a problem to do so. And another reason why I love to gain stage a session is not to peak the plugins. And this is something important in my opinion, especially plugins that are modeled after analog gear. If that process is well done, the plugin is going to behave the same way as an analog gear does. So in the analog world, the level measurement is done in VU. So you probably know what a VU meter looks like, and this is the main level measurement meter of an analog gear. Now in the digital world, we're talking about dBFS, which is dB full scale, and when we go above 0 dB, we are peaking. And when we peak a digital signal, the result is not very good, opposed to going above 0 VU on an analog gear. This is not going to destroy the signal. It's actually going to add some tone to the signal at some point, depending on what analog gear you work with. So plugins that are modeled after an analog gear, like a compressor or a console emulation plugin, and that kept that 0 VU analog calibration. Now, those plugins can end up peaking if the initial signal is way too loud. Okay, so this is something to pay attention to. So that's a reason why I do gain stage also. But if you're just dealing with some digital plugins that are not analog gear emulation, those will not be the same. As far as you don't go above 0 dBFS, you're good. But even with that, I'm still going to gain stage my session for all the other reasons. So what is the perfect gain staging level? You probably heard about the sweet spot of -18 dBFS. I actually talked about that before more than once. And this is actually, yes, a sort of sweet spot. The reason is very simple. If we go back to analog gear again and we look at the 0 VU point, that mark point is going to be the equivalent of -18 dBFS. So that's why we tend to use that number as the sweet spot. And here's the number one mistake that a lot of people are going to do when gain staging a session. They're going to focus way too much on the number. They're going to take that -18 dBFS and they're only going to focus on that. And they're going to take ages to gain stage a session. that is a big problem. And this is something that I receive all the time by email from students, from people watching my videos on YouTube. A lot of time I'm going to have the same questions over and over again about that -18 sweet spot. Do I really need to be gain staging at that level? What if I gain stage at -15? Is that so bad? And they're just freaking way too much on that number only, and they actually lose track of what gain staging is to begin with. And this is something that is very important to understand when it comes to that -18 sweet spot. You don't have to freak out about this. You don't have to focus too much about that level. On my side, I will look at the -18 point for sure, but I'm going to keep my signal between -18 to -10, and that's it. If I'm within that range, I'm good. And then moving on with your mix. Okay, so just don't focus too much on that number. Take that number to your advantage as a guideline, That's it. That's all you need to do. When I do some recording, same thing. I'm going to aim for a recording level of -18 to -10 when it comes to peaks. And I can even sometimes peak at -8 and I'm still going to be good. And when I'm going to start mixing, my levels are going to be okay in my session. I might have to gain stage a few tracks, but that's going to be it, because I did it from the start, from the recording stage. And this is the way I like to work. But if I need to bring some channels down, I just do so in a very simple way, and that's it, and I just move on. Now in Cubase, the way I like to gain stage stuff, there's two ways. First, I can use the gain level here, that I have here on the mix console, and doing it from the mix console actually speeds up my workflow. I just bring all of my channels to unity point, and I just bring down the gain of the loud channels. And that's it. Or just bring up the quieter channels, because this is something that happens as well. A track that was recorded way too quiet, I'm going to need to bring it up. So in that case, I'm going to bring the gain of the channel hotter, so higher. So if you don't see that pre-gain section, what you need to do is to click on tracks on the top of the mix console and make sure that pre-filter gain phase is checked on. And you will see the pre-tab right here on your mix console, and gain is going to be available for you. There's also clip gain that you can work with straight from the project window. You just select the tracks that are too loud and you just bring them down. That's another way you can do it. Both are good. It's a matter of preference. I will do both. I'm mainly going to work with pre-gain, but sometimes just bringing a channel that is way too loud with clip gain is going to do the job pretty well also. Now, I just want to point something out before I end this video. And this is going to be a very useful tip for you. And this is something, again, that is another mistake that a lot of people are going to tend to do. Now, when we're looking at the gain that we have here on top, when we're playing with the gain of a channel in Cubase, we have to realize that this process, whether it's clip gain or working with the gain itself, from the channel settings window right here, or from the mix console, like we have right here, it's the same thing. This is going to be done pre-insert. You're bringing the signal up or down before the signal hits the insert plugins. Okay, so this is something that you need to understand. So before the signal goes through the channel strip and the plugins, the insert plugins and sends and so on, it's going to go through the gain section first. So that's why we do gain staging before we start playing with the faders and before we start adding plugins on. Okay, once this is done, you're going to be good to go. However, you just need to realize that the more plugins you add, the more it will affect the gain of the channel, like the main volume of the channel itself. For example, if you're adding an EQ will affect the level of the channel, because if you're adding some frequencies on your EQ, you're going to gain way more level on your channel. And if you're cutting a bunch of frequencies, the level of the channel is going to end up quieter. Okay, so this is what EQ does. And it's the same for a compressor. Sometimes it's going to compress a signal, the output level is going to be too loud, and you're going to end up with a loud signal, even if you gain stage your signal before. Okay, so you need to be careful with that. And what I do on my side is I gain stage as I go. So I play with the output level of a plugin if I need to. So if I'm working with a plugin that will add a lot of gain to my channel, I'm going to bring down the output so I can keep that same level relation. So for example, let's take this synth bass where I have the Nimbrini PSA1000 inserted. This is a saturation distortion plugin. It's kind of a SansAmp emulation. So if I bypass it first, And let's bring it on. Now it's way louder. So if I keep that as is and I continue mixing my session and I bring down my fader because the level is way too loud, that's one way to do it, and that's okay. If you're not peaking your channel, it's going to be fine. If you're peaking your channel though, and you kind of catch that up later on into the mix, and your channel level is super low, you're picking the channel or a plugin, and you want to gain stage that back. What you need to do is to avoid playing with the gain of the channel, because this is going to mess around with the signal going into your plugin. In my case, the distortion plugin that I have. So I hope you follow this. Let me give you an example. I'm going to bring that back up. So let's say I'm bringing back my channel to unity point, and I want to bring down the level of this channel. So let's use the pre-gain and gain stage my session or my channel. Now I'm probably at the same level as I was before. Now the problem I have right now is that my sound is not the same, okay? So that's why playing with the pre-gain option in Cubase, after you have some plugins on, is a no-go if you want to gain stage a channel later on into the mix. Okay, so I'm gonna just bring that back to the level it was. And what I need to do in that case is to bring the output level of the plugin lower. Now the gain staging level, my initial gain stage level of this channel, stays the same. Okay, so the output level of a plugin is going to be your best friend throughout a mix. So as you insert plugins, if you balance that out with the output level of a plugin, you're going to be fine. Okay, now when we are talking about gain staging, when recording, we are basically talking about how to set up a recording level, when recording music, okay? And this is something very important. I get a lot of tracks, that are well recorded, by clients when I mix for clients. But I also receive tracks once in a while that cause me a bit of problems. Sometimes they are way too hot, which causes the signal to peak. And some other times they will be a bit too low, which is also going to create a problem. Maybe not as much as being recorded too loud, but still, because what happens when we record a signal too hot, we risk on peaking the transients of the signal. And when that happens, that part of the signal is kind of destroyed, and there's no way back. And when a signal is recorded way too low, that can affect the signal to noise ratio, which you end up not using the full bitrate that you have with your converters. With today's audio interfaces, we have access to 24-bit recording, which is a lot of dynamic range. So if we record our signal, our audio way too low, we don't take advantage of that full bitrate that is available for us to use, so that is one of the biggest reasons why I tend to look for the perfect sweet spot when it comes to recording. So I don't record too loud, so I don't end up peaking the transients, and I don't record too quiet, so I don't affect the signal to noise ratio, and I take advantage of my 24 bitrate. So how to find the perfect recording level when recording music? Now, there's two types of levels when we record music. There's the average level and there's the peak level. Now, the average level is also known as RMS level, and the peak level is what we see in Cubase on our mix console. On all the single channels, we have a peak level meter. So the difference between the two is not that complicated. The average level is going to measure how loud does the music feels, and the peak level will measure how loud does the music actually is. Okay, so this is the difference between the two. One is how loud the music feels, and the other one, the peak level, is how loud the music actually is. Okay, so this is the difference between the two, and they're both important. So I'm going to show you what I do on my side to set up my recording levels, and I'm also going to show you all sorts of different tools that you can use to set up your own recording levels in Cubase. Okay, and also that will work for other DAW tools. But we have like one feature in Cubase that is actually very useful in this case. And that feature is the input channel. Every time we, and I talked about that last week, every time we create an input bus, that will create an input channel straight in Cubase that is accessible on the mix console. So if we jump in Cubase right away, this is what I have on my mix console. I only have like one channel that I have in this session, and my microphone is plugged straight into my sound interface, the one that I'm using at the moment. That goes straight on an input bus in Cubase. So if I click on F4, I have my mono in 1, which has my microphone routed into. And that actually created an input channel straight in Cubase. So if you want to access those input channels, you need to go straight on the mix console and make sure that if you click on top here on the set channel type filter, that input channels is checked on. I talked about that on last week's video. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use some plugins straight on the insert side of the input channel. So the peak level meter is what we have on any channels from the mix console in Cubase, which again is going to measure the actual level of the signal, at the exact moment. So that's why it's kind of it's going very fast, because it's going to kind of detect all the peaks at the exact moment. And like a vocal is very dynamic, so the level range is going to be pretty wide. And so I need to figure out what is the perfect recording level, so I don't peak and I don't get a too quiet recording. And what I usually do on my side when it comes to peak level, and it's the same with regular gain staging that I talked about on one of my last videos, I go with an average, between minus 18 dBFS to minus 10 or even minus 8 or 6, at the most when it comes to high peaks. And I know that if I keep myself into that range, I'm going to have a very good level as far as the recording goes. But there's another way you can measure that, is by using an RMS meter or an average level meter, like a VU meter, for example. So let me check if I have the VU meter inserted. There you go. So I have this VU meter, and there's also free alternatives if you want to. This one is a paid one. It's the cheap one. It's like $20 or something, which works very well. But there's also a free alternative that I talked about on I think it was the free mixing plugins video that I made maybe a couple months ago. I'm going to leave the link on top and down below if you want to check it out. And this is calibrated at the moment to minus 18 dB. Okay, so now there's like a big story behind, why we use minus 18 dBFS. I don't want to get into this in this video, but basically, 0 VU is going to be the equivalent of minus 18 dBFS. So this is kind of the kind of relation we're going to have with a VU average level meter and a dBFS level, which stands for dB full scale, which 0 on a dBFS meter is going to be like the maximum level. And the minute you're going to go above that level, your signal is going to peak. So you want to keep yourself some headroom. If we use an RMS meter like Supervision, there's a very cool option in Supervision where Supervision is gonna show you the peak level and also the average level on the same meter. You see, we have the peak level right here. That has like a lighter tone of blue, and we have the average level, okay, which has a darker tone of blue. And this is our RMS reading that goes to minus 20, minus 18, minus 22, which is a very good level. So when I'm talking about a level of minus 18 dBFS, I'm always referring to an average level. And you can actually see what I mean here. So I have the peak level, which can go as high as minus 6, depending on the instrument I'm recording. But my average level is always going to be towards minus 18, minus 20, minus 22, in that kind of range. I know that I'm good when I'm near this range. Okay, so this is a very cool tool that you can use if you have Cubase 11. You have access to Supervision. Now, if you're using Supervision, you just need to make sure that you're using the level module, and also just a quick tip here: just make sure that the RMS AES 17 is on. Okay, so this is going to give you that exact reading. Now, the unfortunate thing with Cubase is the metering that we have access to on the channels themselves. We only have access, as far as the channel goes, we only have access to peak metering. And it would be cool to have access to a meter that can show us the average level on top of the peak level, like we have here with Supervision, but straight on the channel. Studio One has that. Pro Tools also has this type of metering on their channels, which is actually pretty useful. So hopefully they will add this one up on the future version of Cubase, and I'm pretty sure they will at some point. Note that you can also use peak metering straight from your audio interfaces software, and that is another way you can check your recording levels. So what is the most important, whether you're using a VU meter, RMS meter, or only a peak meter, is not to peak your signal, and also to get a strong enough signal so you take advantage of the full bitrate that your interface and converters offers you, and also you get a strong signal to noise ratio. Now on my side, I've been working only with peak level meters when recording, and that worked well as far as I'm concerned anyway. So what I usually do on my side is to keep my recording level between -18 dBFS to -10 dBFS by allowing some peaks that will go up to -6 depending on the signal I'm recording. This way my average RMS level will stay between -22 and -18 dBFS, which is actually perfect. So this way I have a strong, loud signal that doesn't peak. So let's start with question number 1. I'm kind of confused on gain, staging, and compressor settings. If you set the compressor on a certain track, the compression level changes when you change the pre-gain level. Yes, this is normal because pre-gain comes before the signal reaches the EQ, fader, and effects section of the channel. So if you gain stage after mixing or during mixing, you're going to get into this kind of problem because the signal coming into your compressor is not going to be the same if you bring down the pre-gain level. So at this point, why do you want to gain stage? Is it because your master bus is peaking, or is it because your channel, the channel itself, is peaking after you added all of those plugins? But if it was peaking before hitting the plugins, now you need to gain stage before. So you need to use the pre-gain to gain stage your signal down. In that case, you will have to readjust your compressor settings or saturation settings, reverb, delay, and stuff like that. EQ doesn't matter because EQ is not affected by the amount of signal coming into the plugin, but by the signal itself. So that is not going to be a problem. But if your concern is that you're peaking after the signal goes through all the plugins, what you can do is only to add a gain plugin that you can find for free on the web, or use just a stock EQ plugin that has an output level knob and just bring down the output of that last plugin in your chain, and that will gain stage the signal coming out of your channel. So this way your master bus is not gonna peak. All right, so this is things you need to check on your side to see if you really need to gain stage before your signal hits the channels or after. Okay, so it depends. So check it out. I hope that helps. Today I want to talk to you about how to set up gain staging with your virtual instruments. Now the thing with the VSTs like that, they tend to have a very loud signal, especially if you're gain staging at -18 dBFS. They will surely have a higher signal than -18, that is for sure. So what I tend to do is always to work my gain staging before I bounce to audio. So bouncing all the media into audio is something I always do before I get into a mixing session. So this way I'm not stuck with virtual instruments in my mix session. Virtual instruments, they tend to take a lot of CPU, and so I don't want to have the CPU working harder than it's already working in a mix session anyway. So I'm going to avoid that by just bouncing everything into audio. So before I do so, what I check the gain stage of the instrument itself. So for example, here in this recording session, we're going to focus on the piano for now. Okay, so now my VST channel for the piano is right here. So if I want to check if I'm at an average of -18, I'm just going to bring that fader up to 0. So this is one way of checking my gain staging for this instrument. Or I can just right-click if you're in Cubase. You can just right-click and go into Global Meter Settings and make sure the meter position is at input. Okay, so now I'm just going to bring that down and my metering is going to be as if the fader was at 0. Okay, so now, as we can see, my signal is way too hot. So I'm going to bring it down because I want to bounce that to audio. So there are several ways I can do it. First, I can use the, I can just bring that fader down, solo the track, and just export the track into a stereo track back into the project. So that's one way of doing it. And I can also select the segment, click on Edit, Render in Place if you're in Cubase, and Render Settings. And now by having the piano fader down to an average of minus 18 dBFS, I can just make sure the complete signal path is selected in the render selection window. So this way it's going to take into consideration the position of the fader. So by clicking render, the fader will affect the signal coming out of Cubase, getting back into the session as an audio track. Now, my favorite way though is, instead of doing all of this, what I usually do is I go directly into the instrument itself. Like in this case, we're into Contact. I have a Alicia Keys piano loaded, and I'm just going to click on play. And bring down my output. Very simple. Okay, now I'm gonna bring back up my piano. And there you go. So that's a decent gain staging level at an average of minus 18 dBFS. So now I'm ready to bounce or ready to render, whatever you do to get your files, your MIDI files into audio. At this point, everything is going to be gain staged, and you're going to be good to go. So that's the way I usually do it. I just play with the output of the virtual instrument. So again, if you're mixing with your virtual instruments in your session, again, just play with the output of the instrument to gain stage your signal, and then just continue mixing your song. So this is basically it, guys. Very simple, not that complicated. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.
For this video, I want to show you what I use in Cubase to gain stage a session so I can keep things rolling. Because, to be honest with you, I don't want to spend a lot of time gain staging a session. I want this process to be as fast as possible. And with these tools, I'm able to gain stage a session within like 5 minutes, maximum 10 if I'm working on a huge session, but not more than that. And that is plenty of time to gain stage a session. Now in this Cubase session, I have some recording, some are from virtual instruments and others are just an import of a sample library. And this is what I get. And as you can tell, even like at looking at the WAV files, everything seems to be pretty loud, and that happens a lot with virtual instruments and sound libraries. I don't know why, but they love to push it to the maximum level possible. But the problem that creates for me is this. We're not gonna hear any sound, but look at the meters. Now, on paper, all the channels are not peaking, okay? They are below 0 dBFS, but my problem is my master output is so loud, it's peaking, it's way too much, and I don't have enough headroom to start my mix. Okay, I can bring all those faders down if I want to, and start from there. But now, if I do so, I'm gonna lose resolution. And for this only, I like to gain stage my session. It goes way more than that, And if you wonder what resolution is, it's like very simple. If I keep my fader right near the 0 point, the unity point of the channel, I have way more space between dBs than if I go from, let's say I want to get down by 10 dBs at the bottom of the channel. I have less space to work with opposed to up near the unity point. Okay, so this is the resolution of a channel. So if I keep all of my channels down, it's gonna work. I'm gonna be able to mix my my song anyways, you know, but you know, just less resolution to work with. And for me, I like it better, easier to work with, especially for automation when my faders have more resolution to play with. But the main reason why I think it's important to gain stage is to not overload the master bus, and also not to overload some plugins. Most plugins are going to be okay, you know, but the ones that are modeled after analog gear, if they are well modeled, they might peak, because the sweet spot as far as the level goes in analog is not the same as in digital. Again, you can watch my video when I talk about this, but for the most part, since I am working with analog gear while I mix, it's very important for me to have a very good gain structure when I mix, so I don't overload my analog gear. So gain staging is very important as far as I'm concerned. Now, the first thing that I have on my side is my meters. They are colored in a way that I can easily gain stage my session. So look at my meters, the colors on my meters. I have like shades, and I also have like a drastic change of color, which will indicate the minimum level I want to bring my tracks at, okay, which is minus 18 dBFS, which is going to be the equivalent, more or less, of 0 VU on a VU meter, which is found on most analog equipment, which is basically the sweet spot as far as the level goes, to not overload an analog gear. Okay, so that is 0 VU, so that's why minus 18 dBFS. So if I go into Cubase, go to preferences, go down to metering and then appearance, I have my meter. The one that I select is of course the channel meter, okay, but there's several other meters that could be for another video. But for this one, I'm focusing on the channel meter and the colors that I have here. This is not the default colors that comes with Cubase. So I customized those colors to my taste. So I have like a drastic change of color at minus 18, and I have the start of another color at minus 12. And I also have like the level I don't want to go past, which is minus 6 dBFS, which is in red. So basically the trick is to get close to my minus 18 point, but by swimming into the green and yellow of my channel. So this way I know that I'm in between minus 18 to minus 12, sometimes minus 10 on peaks. Okay, so the average levels will stay around minus 18 dBFS, which is what I'm aiming for. And visually speaking, it makes it very fast to gain stage. And the first thing I can do to gain stage is to bring down in volume all the waveforms, the recordings that I have in my session by using clip gain. So let's try this out. I'm gonna select them all and bring them down. And look at what I have on my meters, and go according to the colors that I see, and then I can readjust per track what needs to be readjusted, okay? So like that first drum channel. And also the pads are pretty loud, so I'm gonna bring them down just a bit, you know. And you know, if you look at my stereo output, now my level is pretty much okay. I get lots of headroom and I'm good to go. So this is one way I can do so. Now, something to note is all of my faders are at unity point to give me an exact reading on my levels. But if for some reason not all of my channels are at unity point and I want to monitor the incoming signal, I can just right click on my mixer, go down to global meter settings, and just make the meter position to input, okay? And this is what's gonna happen. Even if I bring down my faders, I still gonna see the level of the recording only, okay? So it's pre-fader in a way, but it's more than that, it's pre-everything, basically. It's the exact level that I have on my recordings. And by doing clip gain, I will see the effect also, because it's kind of part of the recording in a way. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep that to post panner or post fader. Bring everything to to unity point, to 0. And if you don't like to play around with clip gain, not a problem, because another very cool way to gain stage a session is to use a pre-gain in Cubase. I'm gonna go on my mix console and I'm gonna make sure that my pre-tab is open. If you don't see the pre-tab, just click on top on racks and make sure the pre is checked on, and that will bring you the gain level of each track, which will come before the inserts, before everything on that channel. So this is a very cool way to gain stage your session. So in that case, what I could do to start with, if I have like a bunch of tracks, I select all the tracks that are loud and too loud that needs to be brought down, and I'm just gonna, in my case here, click on the quick link on top and just bring down the gain all at once. And then I can fine tune with all the single channels to make sure that everything is well gain staged. And there you go, that fast. Didn't take me a lot of time, you know? Pretty straightforward, and I'm good to go. So this is in a case where you don't want to use a clip gain. You don't want to mess around with the looks of your waveforms, which can be understandable. You know, sometimes you want to get good resolution when it comes to the visual of your waveforms and your recordings, and doing it with pre-gain will do the trick very well. And I tend to reach like the pre-gain knob a lot when I gain stage, and sometimes depending on the tracks I'm just going to reach for clip gain, and that will do the trick also. Sometimes you'll be dealing with some like very dynamic tracks, like a vocal for example, where maybe one part of the vocal like reaches, I don't know, -4 dBFS and the rest is near the -18 or -12. In that case, when what you can do now, I don't have a vocal with me, but just to show you, you can actually manually bring down or clipping down one part of an audio event. You select the event, you click on your draw tool, and you can actually bring down one section of that event manually. Very cool. You know, so let's say this part is too loud, I can actually bring that down. And if I need to bring down the whole file, you know, the whole event, I can do it as a whole, and it's going to keep into consideration the little manual automation I just added on this event, which is quite nice. So that can actually be practical and very useful in some cases. So now at this point, once my gain staging is done, I can start doing my rough mix or my balance mix and start mixing my song, you know, and I'm good to mix into analog gear without any worries. I'm not going to overload the gear and not overload my analog type plugins also. And most importantly, I'm not going to overload my master bus, and even my master bus is going to stay at 0. I'm not going to even touch the fader of my master stereo mix bus. It's going to stay at unity point all the way through my mix. Now, the trick here is not to overanalyze too much when you gain stage. Don't look at the numbers that much. Just go with the average level. By setting up your meters this way, it's going to be very fast to make sure you're in the ballpark without, you know, keeping too much focus on all the numbers and focus too much on the -18 mark point. You just like do it fast. Stay in between -18 to -12, -10s for a dynamic signal that peaks a lot. You know, if you keep yourself into that range, you will be fine. And by using these tools, you'll be able to gain stage very fast without putting lots of time into this process, which shouldn't be very long to work on. Now, one of the most important reasons to gain stage properly is when mixing when analog gear is involved. So as an example, I have a drum recording that is routed into a drum bus, and I'm sending that drum bus in this unit right here, which is a warm audio to MPX. And what I need to focus on is to make sure that the level I'm sending over to the analog gear is well gain staged, okay? So I'm going to use my VU meter that is calibrated to -18. And I can see that I have lots of leverage. My signal doesn't go above that point anyways, so that will make my experience
on mixing with that analog gear way more flexible because I'm not over sending the signal on this analog gear. And as you can tell, straight on the VU meter of that analog gear, I'm way below 0 VU. So in this case, I could increase the gain level straight on the unit and make it closer to 0 VU. So that is one thing I can do. So again, I have lots of leverage, and if I like the sound of the gain of the unit itself, nothing stops me to bring the level below the 0 VU straight in Cubase, and just to give me a chance to increase more of the preamp level or the gain level of the analog gear if I like the color of it. Can also increase the level straight from Cubase and send more level to this analog unit. And to do so, my first pick is going to be to increase the pre-gain level. Or if my signal is way too hot, it's going to be to decrease the pre-gain level straight in Cubase to rebalance the amount of signal I'm sending to this analog gear. So let me bring that by maybe an extra 4 dB, and I can see on my VU meter on top, it's starting to get a bit over 0 VU, which is not a huge deal. What I'm going to look at is the meters on my analog gear, and my signal level is quite good. Okay, so that is one way I can balance the gain level from Cubase to my analog gear. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to 0. And I'm going to use this time around the plugin I'm using to send a signal straight to my analog gear. Okay, and I can adjust the amount of signal I'm sending over to the gear and also the amount of signal that is coming back into my Cubase session. Okay, so this is also a very cool tool to adjust and gain stage the level I'm sending to the analog gear. So in this case, let me add maybe 3 dBs. And if I want it back to the same level, I'm just going to reduce the output by the same amount. So now I have more gain and more signal going into the analog gear, but the output is still balanced. Okay, if this is the output I want to get back into my session. If not, I'm just going to leave that to 0, and that is going to do the trick. So that's why when mixing with analog gear, you always have to pay attention to the amount of signal you're sending out to that gear and what is also coming back in your mixing session, to make sure that everything is well balanced. Because if I send way too much signal or if my recording is way too loud, what's going to happen is I'm going to need to bring down the amount of gain from the analog unit, depending on the analog unit I'm working with. And that gives me way less level. Because the cool thing with gear is that every parameters can have its own tone. So the amount of gain you add can change the tone and the character of the sound. Okay, so that's why you can actually balance the amount of input and rebalance the output just to get a bit more tone and more color. Okay, so that's why by getting a good gain staging level before you send your signal out to an analog gear is going to give you way more leverage to tone shape the sound to your taste using your gear. Okay, so I hope this is not too confusing. Feel free to leave your questions down below.